Congress is an independent branch of government. You all know that. We're obviously monitoring her travel, as we always do for members of Congress, and we've taken all appropriate measures to ensure the safety of her travel throughout the region. Let me be clear. The Speaker's visit is totally consistent with our long-standing One China policy. We've been very clear that nothing has changed about our One China policy, which is guided, of course, by the Taiwan Relations Act, 3 joint U.S. PRC communiques, and the 6 assurances. We've said that we oppose any unilateral changes to the status quo from either side. We've said we do not support Taiwan independence. And we've said, as I said again yesterday, that we expect cross-strait differences to be resolved by peaceful means. And we have communicated this directly to the PRC at the highest levels, including in last week's call between President Biden and President Xi. The National Security Advisor, Secretaries of State and Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff have also made this very clear to Beijing in a half a dozen recent high-level conversations. Now, we've seen a number of announcements from the PRC in just the last several hours that are, unfortunately, right in line with what we had anticipated and what we talked about yesterday. Now, there's no reason, as I said yesterday, for Beijing to turn this visit, which is consistent with long-standing U.S. policy, into some sort of crisis, or use it as a pretext to increase aggressiveness and military activity in or around the Taiwan Strait, now or beyond her travel. And again, as I made clear yesterday, before the Speaker's travel was confirmed by her, China has positioned itself to take further steps, and we expect that they will continue to react over a longer-term horizon. I couldn't give you a date certain of what that horizon looks like, but we certainly would expect them to react even beyond her trip, including announcing additional large-scale live-fire exercises. Of course, they've already started doing some of that today, flying across the median line. We've seen press reports of them doing that today, and using economic coercion. It's exactly in line with the playbook that we anticipated and talked to you about yesterday. The United States will not seek and does not want a crisis. We are prepared to manage what Beijing chooses to do. At the same time, we will not engage in saber rattling. We will continue to operate in the seas and the skies of the Western Pacific as we have done for decades. We will continue to support Taiwan, defend a free and open Indo-Pacific, and seek to maintain communication with Beijing. We will keep doing what we are doing, which is supporting cross-strait peace and stability. And then just real quick, lastly, Karine hinted at this at the top. The President welcomes today's announcement of an extension of the truce in the Yemen conflict. The truce in Yemen, of course, was a key agenda item during the President's visit to Saudi Arabia, where he met with the King and the Crown Prince, and with leaders from across the region. We're grateful for the leadership of Saudi Arabia throughout this truce process, as well as for the Sultan and leaders of Oman, who have also played an important role throughout. Now, this truce is now going on 5 months, has brought a period of unprecedented calm in Yemen, saving thousands of lives and bringing tangible relief for countless Yemenis. 5 months, which may not sound like a lot, but when you're talking about 7 years of war and thousands of Yemeni lives, it counts for a lot. And now we have a chance to extend this another 2 months. So we urge the Yemeni parties to seize this opportunity to work constructively under UN auspices to reach an inclusive, comprehensive agreement that paves the way for a durable, Yemeni-led resolution to the conflict. Advancing the peace process is going to require courage and dedication from all sides. The United States will remain committed and engaged in efforts to advance peace in Yemen and to bring relief to the Yemeni people. And with that, we'll take some questions.
Thank you. Thank you. John, how concerned is the administration right now that Afghanistan has become a safe haven for terrorists?
I think if you were to ask some members of Al-Qaeda, ask them how safe they feel in Afghanistan right now. I think we proved to a fare thee well this weekend that it isn't a safe haven, and it isn't going to be going forward.
What will the repercussions be for the Taliban harboring al-Zawahiri?
I'm not going to telegraph moves and decisions that we might make. I'm certainly not going to get ahead of anything at this point. I would just make 2 points. One, the strike itself shows how serious we are. about accountability. It shows how serious we are about defending our interests. And we're going to maintain, as I said at the outset, we're going to maintain this over-the-horizon capability. In fact, I'd go so far as to say we're going to continue to try to improve that capability going forward. And number two, we've communicated very directly with Taliban leaders our views of their willingness at some level, of course, to harbor Zawahiri and his family. And we have made it clear that not we believe, not we think, not we suppose, but we know that that's a violation of the Doha Agreement.
So obviously, John, just to follow up on that, clearly this shows accountability for Zawahiri and for Al-Qaeda, wherever they are, as you got him in Afghanistan, but it doesn't show accountability for what the Secretary of State described as a gross violation of the Doha Agreement. So can you commit that there will be some act to demonstrate that they will be held accountable in some way? And how do you do that without it looking like, yep, we'll just take out one by one, you can keep allowing more in?
Well, again, I'm not going to telegraph punches that haven't been thrown yet, or decisions that haven't been made yet. We're going to stay vigilant to the threat. We've made it clear to the Taliban that we know what they did, and we know who they harbored, and we know some of the steps they tried to take after the strike to cover up the evidence of it. So we're mindful of it. But I'm not going to get ahead of decisions, policy decisions that haven't been made. I mean, it's not that we take the Taliban at their word, but just indulge me for a second. They claim they want a relationship with the United States and with the West. They claim they want to open up and be part of the international community. They claim they want financing. That's exactly right, Peter. So if that's true, if that's what they really want, then it would behoove them to pay close attention to what we just did over the weekend and to meet their agreements under the Doha Agreement.
Without identifying them, how many other al-Qaeda individuals or leaders do you assess are presently living in Afghanistan?
I'm not going to get into intelligence matters, Peter. We said even before we left Afghanistan last August that we knew al-Qaeda was present in Afghanistan in relatively small numbers, and we know that there are still some al-Qaeda fighters in Afghanistan. I would, again, without getting into classified information here, I would say the number's not very large, and that's core Al-Qaeda. There are also offshoots like ISIS-K, which we know are very active in Afghanistan and right now. The other thing that I want to say, and I know rightly we're focused on Afghanistan, but again, I want to take you back in time a little bit to about a year ago when we talked about this threat and then our departure from Afghanistan. We know that Al-Qaeda has metastasized, both in terms of character. Now they've got different offshoot groups, Al-Shabaab, ISIS, and ISIS has got splinter groups of its own. But they've also metastasized geographically. They're not focused as much in a presence in Afghanistan. They're in North Africa. They're in the Sahel. They're throughout the Middle East. And they're in Yemen. So, I mean, there are other counterterrorism threats in other parts of the world. We're going to stay focused on them all. I get that we're focused on Afghanistan right now, but we're not taking our eye off the rest of the world either.
John, something you just said is not consistent with what we were told last year. You're saying that you've always known there was a small number of al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. President Biden said, what interest do we have in Afghanistan at this point with al-Qaeda gone?
Yeah, I mean, in a major way, al-Qaeda was not playing. No, wait, let me finish. They weren't playing a major role in operations or resourcing or planning in Afghanistan. But Peter, I know specifically because I was at a different podium a year ago, and we talked about the fact that Al-Qaeda had a presence in Afghanistan, but small and not incredibly powerful or potent. And I think, again, without getting into numbers, we would still assess that to be the case.
So we know that the Taliban was harboring the world's most wanted terrorist. You guys gave a whole country to a bunch of people that are on the FBI most wanted list. What did you think was going to happen?
I would take issue with the premise that we gave a whole country to terrorist groups. I mean, again, I'd encourage you to ask.
Harboring the world's #1 terrorist. How is that not giving a country to a terrorist sympathizing group, if not giving them permission to have terrorists just sit on a balcony?
The question, I mean, Peter, the way you asked that, it makes it sound like we owned Afghanistan a year ago. It wasn't our country. It was an independent sovereign state. And the president made a bold decision to end a war that had been going on for 20 years because he believed then, and still believes now, that our national security interests are best met by meeting the threats of today, not the threats of 2001. And I don't want to relitigate the whole war here, but obviously no one anticipated the Ghani government to fall as fast as it did. But we said at the time that as we depart Afghanistan, we're going to keep vigilant. We're going to stay ready, and we're not going to let Afghanistan become a safe haven for terrorists who threaten our homeland. And this past weekend, we proved that case precisely.
But so now that you know that the Taliban is not living up to the part of the deal that they made with the U.S. to not let Afghanistan be a place that terrorists feel like they can be safe, what are you going to do about it?
Well, that gets to Peter's question. I'm not going to telegraph decisions that haven't been made or policy initiatives one way or the other.
Are we
I would just say
for some spectacular terrorist attack in the U.S. to then say, oh, well, there's terrorists
if we
and
were,
a safe
Peter,
haven in Afghanistan. Now we can go get them.
If we were, Peter, then we wouldn't have taken the hit on Saturday, the strike that we took on Mr. Zawahiri, if we were just waiting. This isn't about waiting. It's about watching. And we watched very closely, and we acted on what we learned. And I would go so far as to say not only the American people are safer as a result of President Biden's decision, but the rest of the world is safer. Does that mean that the threat from al-Qaeda is over? No, of course it's not. Now, they'll have to make some decisions here, and we'll watch that too. And if we discern a threat to the American homeland again from them or any other terrorist group, the president will reserve the right to take that action again.
We're going to go around here.
Thank you. John, now that the House Speaker is actually in Taiwan, can you give us a sense of President Biden's thoughts on the matter? Does he support that? And then secondly, what kind of lines of communication, if any, are ongoing today between the two governments?
Well, I mean, you have the Speaker of the House that's in Taipei right now. Of course, she's going to be meeting with government leaders. We have stayed in touch with our Taiwan counterparts, of course, and we've stayed in touch with Speaker Pelosi's staff as she has progressed through this trip.
Just to clarify, I meant with Beijing.
I don't have any specific conversations with PRC leaders to speak to today, but we, as you know, we have an ambassador there, we have an embassy. I mean, we are in routine communication with leaders in Beijing, but I refer you to the State Department for anything that they might or might not have communicated.
And then about President Biden, does he?
Look, I said this yesterday. The president, as a former senator, fully respects the right and the prerogative, frankly, the responsibility of members of Congress to include the Speaker of the House to travel overseas.
But that's a different question, or that's a different response. Than does he support her going?
He respects the Speaker's decision to travel to Taiwan.
Yeah, Courtney in the back.
Thanks. I wanted to ask about Ukraine, specifically the refugee situation. The president had committed to accepting 100,000 refugees from Ukraine, and I know that whole idea is that they would stay here temporarily for 2 years. Is the expectation that, or is that still the U.S. view that they should be here for 2 years, or would you or would the president consider extending that, given that the war is ongoing and you don't know when people may or may not be able to return home?
I don't have any policy changes to speak to today, so I mean, I can happily take that question or refer you to the State Department, but I don't know of any changes to the essential decision by the president to provide a place for Ukrainian refugees to come, even if it is just temporarily. I mean, what we've seen over the course of now almost 6 months of war is that a lot of Ukrainians who left in the early weeks are going back for various reasons. And in the early weeks of the war, we were seeing families cross the border, and then either the mom or the dad or both would drop the kids off with somebody and go right back in. So there's a strong desire by Ukrainians to be in their homeland, to be in their country, and we respect that.
Would you have to ask Congress for the ability for them to stay longer?
I won't get ahead of policy decisions that haven't been made yet. I mean, our commitment to supporting Ukraine has not changed. There's been no change to the president's commitment in this regard in terms of welcoming refugees, but I just don't have any changes for you today.
Thank you.
Mr. Kirby, Al-Zawahiri killed He killed more than 200 people in Tanzania and in Kenya in 1998. And right now, even though the U.S. compensated U.S. citizens who were victims of those bombings, the people in Kenya and Tanzania, they've received nothing. What message do you have for them now that you've killed?
Yeah, I'd say the same thing I told Mr. Ducey here, that this is not just a good day for the United States of America, it's a good day for the world.
Yeah, but I'm saying that the families of the victims of those bombings were not compensated by the U.S. What message do you have?
I don't have any compensation policies here to speak to. Again, Mr. Zawahiri's death is good for everybody around the world. He was a killer, and it's a good thing that he's no longer walking the face of the earth. It also means that we're going to have to stay vigilant to this threat going forward.
So you say that the lives of Kenyan and Tanzanian don't really matter.
Wow, I got to take issue with that. I did not say that, and I don't even know where you came from on that one. Of course, all lives matter. I didn't say that. I didn't say that, sir. And I really, really take exception to the tone and the implication in that question. Of course, their lives matter. Every life matters, particularly a life taken so violently as by the hands of a terrorist. If those lives didn't matter, sir, we wouldn't have taken the action that we took this weekend. And if those lives didn't matter, sir, we wouldn't be staying vigilant to the threat going forward, which we will do.
John, on Taiwan?
Oh my gosh. All the Nancy's.
Nancy
squared.
Second row, Nancy.
Was anything you saw today from China's response a surprise? I know that there were the drills and missile tests that Beijing announced that they would conduct. Was that what they've been warning about in private to the White House?
I'm not going to talk about private discussions. What I would tell you is that what we've seen thus far, and she just arrived, is consistent with the playbook that we expected them to run, and we'll just keep watching it. It's one of the reasons why I came out here yesterday to sort of lay some of that out for you. So what we've seen so far, been pretty consistent.
And is the president planning to speak with Speaker Pelosi after she leaves Taiwan, or when she gets back here to get a readout or a sense of that trip?
I don't have any conversations that I could announce or speak to. Obviously, if he does have a conversation like that, I'm sure Kareem would let you know.
When it comes to Taiwan, it appears the retaliation has already begun. China banned exports from 100 Taiwanese brands. Are you concerned that Taiwan is going to end up paying too steep a price for this U.S. visit?
There's no reason for that to happen, Nancy. As we said today and yesterday, no reason for China to take what is a perfectly legitimate and consistent travel by the Speaker of the House and turn it into some pretext for amping up the tensions or creating some sort of crisis or conflict. There's just simply no reason for that. And because she's not acting, we're not acting in any way inconsistent with the way we've been acting now for decades, since the Taiwan Relations Act was passed into law back in the late 70s. I can't speak for Chinese actions or Chinese decisions one way or another. We're going to continue to watch this and monitor this. I would just say that we don't support Taiwan independence. We've said that before. We do support Taiwan's self-defense in keeping with the Taiwan Relations Act. We're going to keep doing that, and we're going to keep working on revitalizing our alliances and partnerships in the region for a free and open Indo-Pacific.
And what is this going to do to the U.S.-China relationship, which is already so fraught?
I think the fact that the president talked to President Xi last week for 2 hours is an indication of how much the president understands and respects the consequential nature of this bilateral relationship. As I've said before, one of the most consequential, not just in the region, but in the world. And the president wants to keep those lines of communication open. It is particularly important to do that when there's times of tension like right now, to make sure those lines of communication remain open. So I would say, to answer your question, one, we don't want to see this spiral into any kind of a crisis or conflict. Again, we would say there's no reason to. Number two, we want to be able to maintain those lines of communication. But a lot of this is going to depend. Answering your question is going to depend a lot on how China behaves over coming days and weeks.
Hey, John,
We'll come to that.
John, given the concerns you were just talking about with China's actions in response to this visit by the Speaker, the heightened tensions, the risks of provocations and the like, does the President believe that the Speaker's trip is a net benefit to U.S. national security interests or not?
Look, the President doesn't typically comment on congressional travel. As I said, he respects her decision to go. And he believes it's perfectly consistent with American policy going back decades and supported by both parties.
But he doesn't. Does he believe it hurts U.S. foreign policy interests in the region?
The President has already seen that Speaker Pelosi has already accomplished some important conversations on this trip with respect to foreign policy, with her stop in Singapore and Kuala Lumpur. And then, she's already announced she's moving on to Japan and South Korea, two of our treaty allies in the Pacific. So he welcomes her conversations. He welcomes her contributions to American foreign policy and our foreign policy objectives overseas. But, I mean, the trip's not even over yet. So I think we ought to give the Speaker a chance to talk about what she did, what she learned, and what she took away from this trip when she gets back.
And then just back to the al-Zawahiri strike. You mentioned that you weren't going to telegraph the punches before they were thrown, but has the President decided that the Taliban should pay a price, or has he not decided that they should pay a price for harboring al-Qaeda?
I'm not going to get ahead of the President on this. I think the Taliban already has paid a price just in terms of the now very public acknowledgement that they were harboring Zawahiri and his family. And that the United States did exactly what the President promised we would do. Now, beyond that, I'm just not going to get ahead of the President or any decisions he might or might not make. The Taliban have a choice now. Well, they always did, but they certainly have a new choice. And that is they can comply with their agreement under the Doha agreement, comply with their commitments under the Doha agreement, or they can choose to keep going down a different path. And if they go down a different path, it's going to lead to consequences, not just from the United States, but from the international community. This is a group that says they want to govern, that they want legitimacy, that they want financing, that they want international support. And if that's true, then one would hope that they would behave in a manner consistent with those goals. Harboring Mr. Zawahiri and his family and being willing to allow them to live in downtown Kabul and then to try to cover up the fact that they were, seems inconsistent with those goals.
Okay, Jeremy, then we're going back to you.
I have a question on Taiwan, but first on Zawahiri. Was Siraj Haqqani aware that Zawahiri was in Kabul?
There were senior members of the Haqqani network that were aware. I'm not going to go any further than that.
Okay, so you won't say if Siraj Haqqani himself was aware?
I'm not going to go any further.
You've held up this strike as a vindication of the U.S.'s over-the-horizon capabilities, but what makes you confident that you can maintain that capability and that this wasn't simply a one-off? I mean, to my knowledge, this is the first and only counterterrorism strike the U.S. has conducted since the withdrawal from Afghanistan.
It's the first and only over-the-horizon counterterrorism strike we conducted in Afghanistan.
That's what I'm sorry.
Since then. But you remember we also killed Haji Abdullah in Syria using an over-the-horizon capability. So what gives me confidence is coming from a place of understanding myself from previous assignments, what our capabilities are in the region. And they're robust. We said that at the time. We've heard Secretary Austin say there's not a scrap of the earth that the United States can't touch if we need to. And that's true. And since last year, Jeremy, we have worked hard to try to improve those capabilities. Now, I'm not going to get into the details of how we're doing that right now, but we have. We've worked hard to make them more robust. And the process of improvement doesn't have a shelf life. There's no deadline on that. You constantly try to improve military capabilities, and particularly one in this realm. So, I mean, we can expect Al-Qaeda is probably going to behave a little differently now. So we're going to have to be mindful of that. So we're always going to be working to get better at it.
Are you going to limit those efforts to targeting only the highest of value targets in Afghanistan?
The president, I think, laid it out very clearly back then and then yesterday, that we're going to make sure that Afghanistan cannot become a safe haven for terrorists who want to attack or plotting to attack the United States of America and our interests.
And then very quickly on Taiwan, what is the U.S. doing to prepare for any further Chinese action and particularly any military repercussions for Taiwan from China? Are we seeing any force posture changes in the region and anything else that the U.S. is doing to help Taiwan?
I think you can understand I'm not going to talk about force posture or military movements one way or the other.
Maybe we're a different podium.
Yeah, nice try. No, I'm not going to do that. We take our security commitments in the region broadly very, very seriously. We have robust military capability, obviously available to meet those commitments. We're going to watch what happens here as closely as we can. The only thing that I will say, as I said at the top, is that we're going to make sure that Speaker Pelosi's trip, the whole trip, is safe and secure for her.
Thank you. As you mentioned, we're seeing some pretty provocative stuff, unfortunately, from China, whether that's canceling food exports or planned military exercises. I'm wondering, given these developments, does the White House believe that it would have been better that news of Speaker Pelosi's proposed trip had not leaked last month? Would it have been better if this remained secret until she was on the ground?
Look, it's hard to speak to leaks in this town and what effect they. I mean, you're asking me to sort of go back in time and sort of disprove a negative here. Look, the leak was certainly unfortunate. Wherever it came from, it was unfortunate because the speaker, as we have said, Karine has said, and I have said, should be able to talk to her travel in her own terms. And you know, when she landed, she announced she was there.
And then one more very quickly. House Republicans are already moving forward with legislation that they plan on proposing it that would create a sort of lend-lease program for Taiwan. Is this an overreaction? Is this something that perhaps heightens tensions at a moment when they should be mellowed?
I won't speak to Congress and their motivations or whoever, and I'm certainly not going to talk about proposed legislation. I would tell you that it's time to wake up. I would tell you that there's been long-standing bipartisan support since the late 70s for the Taiwan Relations Act, both sides of the aisle, and that remains today. And we take our obligations under that act very seriously, which provides for a way, a method of assisting Taiwan with their self-defense. And so through I can't speculate about where this proposed legislation is going to go, and I'm certainly not going to offer an administration policy statement on it since it's simply proposed. But I can be certain, and it's important for everybody to understand how seriously we take our obligations under that Taiwan Relations Act, and we're going to continue to do that. I mean, even just under President Biden, you know, we've provided $1 billion worth of defense articles under the Taiwan Relations Act. So it's a serious commitment.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Corinne.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Sebastian. Yeah. So 2 questions, please. Can you confirm Chinese media reports that the U.S. ambassador in Beijing was summoned by the government and it was in the middle of the night? That's the Global Times is reporting that.
We know that Ambassador Burns has had discussions with his Chinese interlocutors, but I'd refer you to the State Department in terms of being summoned in the middle of the night.
And the other one, there was an interesting nugget in the middle of a latest Thomas Friedman column, which was ostensibly all about Taiwan, but he then mentions Ukraine. And there was an intriguing couple paragraphs in there where he's supposedly quoting people from inside the administration telling him that, I can't remember the exact words, but it was essentially that there's less trust in Volodymyr Zelensky than is being reported, and that there's actually, I've got it right here. There is deep mistrust between the White House and President Volodymyr Zelensky. I'm only asking you because Thomas Friedman is obviously somebody who's read widely and supposedly has, you know, contact with people inside the White House. So,
yeah, the president has spoken many, many times to his admiration for President Zelensky's leadership and courage in this time of war. He has obviously spoken to President Zelensky personally many times, and he knows, understands the stress that President Zelensky and all the Ukrainian people are under, and that's why he has remained very committed to continuing to support Ukraine in their fight against Russian aggression. He has privately and publicly expressed that respect for President Zelensky and for the challenges that he and his fellow citizens are facing.
In an effort to advance the public's understanding of what happened in the Zawahiri operation, can you explain that the Hellfire missiles apparently have these blades? Can you explain how operationally that worked, and to avoid civilian casualties, what the capabilities of those missiles are and how it all played out?
No.
All right. How about this one? Last night, a senior official was asked, to avoid any doubt being aired about whether, in fact, it was Zawahiri who was targeted. There's multiple intelligence sources, multiple methods. Is there anything you can tell about being aired about the fact that it was, in fact, Zawahiri who was killed?
There's a limit to how much detail we can provide on this. I would tell you that it's a combination of visual evidence and evidence collected through other means that led us to the certainty before that this was the guy, and that led us to the conclusion after with a high degree of confidence that he was no more.
Is it physical evidence?
It's a visual evidence and evidence collected through other means. I really think that's about as far as I can go. But the assessment is high confidence that we got who we were aiming for. And I think, just without getting into more detail, I mean, just the various things that the people on the ground did afterward also helped us come to that conclusion.
Well, John Kirby, their National Security Council coordinator, with the difficulty, of course, that there's no DNA evidence to prove that Ayman al-Zawahiri, Al-Qaeda's leader, was indeed killed in that attack. That is what happens, I guess, when you fire 2 Hellfire missiles from a drone into a man on a balcony, in fact, in a leafy residential neighborhood in central Kabul. Lots of questions about what he was doing there. How come the Taliban, it seems, were harboring them in violation of the Doha Agreement, that Afghanistan would not be a safe haven for terrorists, which is what allowed for the handover of power, which, remember, became very chaotic last August. But there are the pictures then, no other deaths in that. High confidence that it was indeed Ayman al-Zawahiri. And he said that he was the world's most wanted terrorist. He continued to be an active threat, although Al-Qaeda has itself, as he put it, metastasized, fragmented into groups, geographically diverse. Still, this was the world's most wanted terrorist. We will, of course, get more reaction to that later, speaking to a former ambassador as well on that. And as you heard, plenty of questions too about the other big event, which is Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House of Representatives' visit to Taiwan, defying China and their threat of retaliation. We'll certainly come on to that as well a little later in the programme. In the meantime, the news that the mother of 12-year-old Archie Battersby has told Sky News that his life support will be withdrawn tomorrow morning following a decision by the Supreme Court today. Archie has been in a coma since April. Doctors say that he is brain dead and continued life support is not in his best interests. Well, Shingi Marurike is at the Royal London Hospital in East London, and very, very difficult times for his family, Shingi.